His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The movement he started is now known to millions around the world, yet he himself remained in the background. Without personal ambition, he worked humbly to spread Krishna consciousness, devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet his achievements and personal character did not go unnoticed. The world's leading scholars and religionists praised his unique contribution, and thousands grew to love him as their dearmost friend and well-wisher. In his memory, his disciples erected a stunning memorial in the hills of West Virginia, now visited by 500,000 people a year. In this and many other ways around the world, Srila Prabhupada is offered expressions of love by those whose lives he most deeply touched.
Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare.
Always remember Krishna, God, and never forget him. This was the goal of the rich spiritual culture that flourished in India for thousands of years. Even today, Lord Krishna is remembered and glorified through monumental achievements in architecture, art, drama, music, dance, and philosophy. Calcutta, 1896, the capital of India, the crown jewel of the British Empire, an elegant city of wide avenues and spacious parks. It is here that Aboy Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami is born. A pure devotee of Krishna from birth, Aboy Charan is raised in a well-to-do mercantile family. From infancy, he goes with his father to the Radha Krishna temple, and at age 4, the child spontaneously begins worshipping similar deities in his home. When Aboy Charan hears of Ratha Yatra, a traditional festival in honor of Lord Krishna, it further inspires his natural devotion. With his father's help, every year he holds his own small celebration, drawing the neighborhood children into the festivities. At age 8, Aboy Charan enters the nearby Mati Lal Seal School. After graduation, he attends Scottish Churches College, one of the most respected in Calcutta. At the time, Mahatma Gandhi is organizing his countrymen in a nationwide boycott of everything British. Gandhiism is surging through India, uniting her in a massive non-cooperation movement. Sensitive to British subjugation of India's culture and people, Aboy Charan becomes an early supporter of Gandhi's movement. But 1922 marks a turning point in Aboy Charan's life. He meets Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami, the greatest devotee of Krishna of his time. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta belongs to the disciplic succession of spiritual masters extending back to Lord Krishna himself. He convinces Aboy Charan that Krishna's spiritual message transcends India's dependent position. Nothing is more important. He requests Aboy Charan to spread Krishna consciousness in the Western world. Aboy Charan hears and is deeply impressed. By this time, Aboy Charan has a growing family. He moves to Allahabad and starts a successful pharmacy. All the while, his spiritual master's words remain implanted in his heart. In 1933, he becomes a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who comments, "He will do everything in due time." 3 years later, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta leaves this world, after again requesting Aboy Charan to preach in English. Aboy Charan takes his words to heart and starts writing prodigiously. In 1944, he single-handedly begins publishing and distributing Back to Godhead, a fortnightly. The first issue addresses the crisis of war. The Second World War within 20 years is scourging the earth. Back to Godhead points out that people throughout the world want an end to war. But so often they want God's kingdom without God. and they cannot have it. All our plans will be doomed to failure by our own selfishness unless we turn to God. After the war, Aboy Charan moves to Jhansi and founds the League of Devotees. He prepares a charter for an international organization, its members dedicated to a peaceful, God-centered life. Acharya Prabhakar, his first disciple, remembers.
शिक्षा लेने के लिए, दीक्षा लेने के लिए उन्होंने प्रश्न किया.
He was always teaching Krishna consciousness, and people came to him for knowledge. After hearing from him, many wanted to become his disciple. He told them, I can make you my disciple, but first you please chant the names of God and give up cigarettes, meat eating, illicit sex, and gambling. But few people would agree to give up these habits. Then he said, Indians are imitating the Westerners. I will make disciples in the West. Then when the Indian people see Westerners following religious principles, they will also follow. Following tradition, at age 58, Aboy Charan retires from family life, and 5 years later accepts the renounced order. He is now known as A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. He lives alone in the historic medieval temple of Radha Damodar in Vrindavan, engaged in deep studies and writing. It was in Vrindavan that Lord Krishna revealed his pastimes 50 centuries ago, and saintly persons throughout the ages have worshipped this land as the most sacred on earth. Unlike other holy men who live there, Bhaktivedanta Swami is not thinking of retiring. For him, Vrindavan is a source of inspiration, an ideal place to chant, worship, and write. Here he begins work on his life's masterpiece, translation and commentary on the monumental devotional classic Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhaktivedanta Swami calls it a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. But often he leaves Vrindavan to print his magazine and books in nearby Delhi. Traveling takes time and tolerance, but Bhaktivedanta Swami accepts it as part of his spiritual mission to broadcast devotional service to Lord Krishna. He writes, our leaders have carefully set aside the treasure house of India's spiritual asset, and they are imitating the Western material way of life. But people are more unhappy than ever before because of the exclusion of the most important part of life, the spiritual aspect. In Delhi, Bhaktivedanta Swami personally distributes copies of Back to Godhead, and with small donations, struggles to maintain the publication. He regularly sees Surendra Kumar Jain, a printer.
It was somewhere in the month of February 1956 that I first met Prabhupada. He came to my press for getting the magazine printed, Back to Godhead. I found that it was not very easy for him to collect money. He would come to the press practically every day, and after the printing was done, he would do everything himself. But he was a dedicated person, a very committed person. And at the times when he was not in a position to pay the bills, I would ask him, why are you running this? Why don't you stop it? He would say, no, it is my mission. And one day, Surendra Kumar, you will see that I will succeed in my mission.
By 1964, Bhaktivedanta Swami completes 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri lauds his accomplishment and recommends his books for placement in India's public libraries. Sumati Morarji, chairman of the Scindia Steamship Company, gives contributions for printing Bhaktivedanta Swami's books and arranges for his passage to America.
And he used to come every evening. And one day he said that he would like to go to America. I was surprised. I said, Swamiji, don't go there. You are too old to go and it will be too cold for you. Still he insisted. So I said, all right. So I made arrangement for him to go by Jaladuta. On way, while he was passing through Suez, that day was Lord Krishna's birthday. And he gathered all the people on board the ship, all the crew members, officers, and recited some shloka, and then some prasad was distributed to them and all that.
Bhaktivedanta Swami, a lone mendicant, 70 years old, traveling halfway across the world. His only resources, the message he carries and his unflinching faith. The voyage on the Jaladuta proves a great trial. Bhaktivedanta Swami endures seasickness and then suffers severe chest pains. In 2 days he has 2 heart attacks. If another comes, he thinks he will surely not survive. But gradually he recovers. He writes, "I feel today better, but I am feeling separation from Vrindavan. I have no qualification, but I have taken up the risk just to carry out the order of my spiritual master." September 17th, 1965. The Jaladuta arrives in Boston Harbor. On board, Bhaktivedanta Swami writes, "My dear Lord Krishna, you are so kind upon this useless soul, but I do not know why you have brought me here. Most of the population here is absorbed in material life. How will I make them understand your message? I can simply repeat your words, and if you like, you can make my power of speaking suitable for their understanding. I have no devotion, nor do I have any knowledge, but I have strong faith in the holy name of Krishna. I have been designated as Bhaktivedanta, devotion with knowledge, and now, if you like, you can fulfill the real purport of Bhaktivedanta. Signed, the most unfortunate, insignificant beggar, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami." Bhaktivedanta Swami first stays in Butler, Pennsylvania, in the home of a friend's son, Gopal Agarwal, and his wife Sally. Although comfortable in Butler, Bhaktivedanta Swami thought the most important philosophy in the world, Krishna consciousness, should be spread in one of the most important cities in the world, New York. He moves to 100 West 72nd Street. 3 months later, his typewriter and tape recorder for translating are stolen. Bhaktivedanta Swami later said, "I came to America risking my life. I was physically unfit and at the fag end of my days. Sometimes I did not know where to live, nor was I used to the severe cold. Seemingly I was alone for 1 year, but I never felt alone. I always felt the presence of my spiritual master, so I did not lose my enthusiasm, despite all difficulties." Bhaktivedanta Swami arrived in America during a decade of discontent. There's widespread dissatisfaction with America's war in Vietnam and with what some consider her racist, exploitative dealings at home and abroad. Disillusioned by the establishment, the youth create a counterculture of their own. Around the time Bhaktivedanta Swami came, waves of Americans are breaking away from the status quo, searching for an alternative. For a short time, Bhaktivedanta Swami lives in the Bowery in a loft given by a friend. Preparing something, Bhaktivedanta Swami later wrote, and he brought you to me one by one, sincere boys and girls, to be trained in Krishna consciousness. Now I can see that it is a miracle. Otherwise, one old man with only a few books to sell for barely getting food, how could he survive? What to speak of introducing a God-conscious movement in a materialistic society? For Bhaktivedanta Swami, these are happy days. Singing and speaking with the vigor of a young man, he brings the Hare Krishna movement into the public eye by chanting in the parks, by distributing Back to Godhead magazine, by holding free Sunday love feasts. Many are attracted. His hopes for the future expand without limit. The Hare Krishna movement has taken root. Bhaktivedanta Swami does not belong to New York. He belongs to Krishna. So when a few of his followers invite him to San Francisco, he goes and introduces the freewheeling youth to Krishna, his ancient culture, his spiritual food, his eternal chant, the way to stay high forever. In the heart of the hippie movement, Haight-Ashbury, Golden Gate Park, and in the hearts of the hippies, the Hare Krishna mantra resounds with unimagined potency. As in New York, Bhaktivedanta Swami gathers sincere followers. The Hare Krishna movement begins to grow. Bhaktivedanta Swami becomes respectfully known as Prabhupada, meaning one at whose feet the masters sit. From Montreal, Prabhupada sends 6 disciples to open a temple in London. As people come to him, convinced of the Krishna conscious philosophy, Srila Prabhupada accepts them for initiation, not on the basis of birth, as in the rigid Hindu caste system, but on the basis of qualification and sincerity. In the whole history of Indian spiritual life, no one has ever attempted something as bold and seemingly impossible, to transform Westerners into full-fledged devotees of Lord Krishna. But by his intense spiritual energy and compassion, Srila Prabhupada is successful beyond his own expectations. In Srila Prabhupada's eyes, Krishna consciousness is not an armchair philosophy or a part-time religion. It is a way of life, a transcendental culture that can end man's political, economic, and social problems. To realize his vision, Srila Prabhupada circles the globe 14 times in 12 years, inspiring his followers and discussing Krishna consciousness with all interested persons. His door is open to everyone. To revive the Krishna conscious tradition in its full richness, Prabhupada envisions God-centered, self-sufficient farm communities based on the principle of plain living and high thinking. The first such community begins on 133 acres in the hills of West Virginia. Prabhupada calls it New Vrindavan, after Krishna's place of pastimes in India. In 1972, Srila Prabhupada begins a Krishna-conscious primary school system in Dallas, Texas. Srila Prabhupada gradually trains his disciples in the time-honored tradition of deity worship to help them advance spiritually. He explains, "I have introduced this system of deity worship among the non-believers, the atheists. Krishna cannot be understood with our present senses, but by his kindness he agrees to personally appear as the deity to accept our service. When we are attracted to the beautiful form of the deity, we will forget our attraction for material things. And as we serve the deity, we will develop pure love of God. Then our lives will be successful." In Melbourne, Australia, Srila Prabhupada worships Lord Chaitanya, a divine incarnation of Krishna. For 5 years after first arriving in America, Srila Prabhupada presents Krishna consciousness primarily to Westerners, from housewives to hippies to heads of state. Then, in November 1971, after a world tour, he returns to Delhi with some of his followers. The mayor receives him with the fanfare that greets a homecoming patriot. Prabhupada quotes Lord Chaitanya. It is the duty of those born in India to benefit others by spreading Krishna consciousness. This is India's greatest glory, her unique gift to the world. 30,000 Indians gather nightly at the Delhi fairgrounds to see the Western devotees and hear Prabhupada speak. While the Hare Krishna movement spreads worldwide, Srila Prabhupada wants to nurture its roots in India. He journeys to Mayapur, West Bengal, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. It was Lord Chaitanya who inaugurated, 500 years ago, the congregational chanting of God's holy names. In Mayapur, devotees purchase a small tract of land and start constructing an international guest house. For a handful of devotees who know nothing about construction, this is not an easy task. Srila Prabhupada directs and encourages them. For ourselves, he says, we are happy and satisfied living in a grass hut. But if we simply have a hut, who will come here? The more we develop our land, the more people will be attracted. Prabhupada plans to build a temple of understanding to house the world's largest planetarium, and around it, a spiritual city with schools, shops, farms, and many temples for worshipping Lord Krishna. Within the hearts of India's people is a natural respect for the eternal Krishna-conscious culture. Many come forward to take part in Srila Prabhupada's movement and accept initiation from him. No one should go hungry within a 10-mile radius of the temple, Prabhupada instructs. In March 1972, devotees start the ISKCON Food Relief Program, distributing prasad, vegetarian food offered to Lord Krishna. As the Mayapur project develops, Prabhupada invites his disciples from 6 continents to join together yearly on the anniversary of Lord Chaitanya's appearance. Prabhupada wants them to be purified and inspired by remembrance of the Lord in his holy land. In Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada treats his followers to a guided tour of the holy places and personally relates Lord Krishna's pastimes. The devotees relish a bath in the sacred waters of the Yamuna River. Prabhupada acquires land in Bombay, India's most cosmopolitan city. Although he has only a hut for a temple, Prabhupada envisions an international cultural center. His ambition is to give as many people as possible access to the nectar of transcendental life, whether through philosophy, service, or spiritual food, so that everyone can become happy, hopeful, and peaceful. Gradually, Srila Prabhupada says, I am seeing all my dreams being fulfilled. In Bombay, a spacious marble temple, a theater, a restaurant, a library, and a twin-towered 7-story hotel. In Mayapur, the planned spiritual city develops. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. In Vrindavan, the popular Krishna Balaram Temple, an international guest house, and a secondary school. Prabhupada sees his society grow into a worldwide confederation with more than 100 temples, restaurants, institutes, schools, and farm communities. 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya predicted that one day the holy name of Krishna would be heard in every town and village of the world. By the mid-70s, Hare Krishna becomes a household word. As a child, Srila Prabhupada celebrated Rath Yatra near his home in Calcutta with his playmates. Years later, he is still celebrating the Rath Yatra festival, but now on the main streets of 20 large cities around the world, and with hundreds of thousands of disciples and guests.
People follow, imitate Americans. I am traveling all over the world. Everywhere I see they are trying to manufacture the skyscraper building, imitating your country. So, if you kindly become Krishna conscious and chant and dance in ecstasy, emotional love of God, the whole world will follow you and it will be Vaikuntha, there will be no more trouble. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama.
Wherever in the world he happens to be, Srila Prabhupada follows a regular daily schedule. In the quietude of the early mornings, he goes out for lengthy strolls and shares intimate moments with a small group of students and guests. Rejecting superficial and dogmatic thinking, he carefully guides his students to increased insight and understanding. After his walk, Srila Prabhupada greets the deities of the Supreme Lord, offers obeisances, and lectures on a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Established in 1972, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust exclusively publishes Srila Prabhupada's works. It becomes the world's largest distributor of books in the field of Indian religion and philosophy. For Srila Prabhupada, the transcendental knowledge in these books forms the basis of the Hare Krishna movement, a movement prophesied to grow for the next 10,000 years. In 1977, despite his failing health, Srila Prabhupada continues traveling and teaching. February 1977, the world's largest pilgrimage, Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, India. Millions gathered to bathe in the holy Ganges. Although physically weak, Srila Prabhupada attends. His disciples perform kirtan and distribute books and Back to Godhead magazines. Although his illness steadily worsens, Srila Prabhupada speaks nightly at a program in Bombay. In May, he journeys to Rishikesh at the foot of the Himalayas to try to regain his health. There he continues to instruct his intimate disciples. Then in October, Srila Prabhupada returns to his old home, Vrindavan, to spend his final days. Even though he is physically incapacitated, Srila Prabhupada's intellect remains clear. He continues dictating translations and comments on his life's work, Srimad Bhagavatam, until days before he departs from this world. November 14th, 1977, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada passes on. That divine personality who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings, who imparted knowledge in thousands of ways, and who inspired thousands of devotees, has now returned to his Lord, Sri Krishna. Being kind to his devotees, Lord Krishna gave them the association of Srila Prabhupada. Being independent in his desires, the Lord has now broken that association. Yet Srila Prabhupada remains. He lives forever in his teachings, and he lives forever in the hearts of his followers as their ever well-wisher.